Spoiled teen takes advantage of the maid. This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. My name is Maggie. I grew up in a world where I never had to lift a finger for anything. My mother, Evelyn, was a successful businesswoman, and because of her, I never had to worry about money, responsibilities, or hard work. To me, life was simple. If I wanted something, I got it. But everything changed the day I answered the door and saw Linda standing there in the rain, looking desperate. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, stepping outside quickly so my mother wouldn't hear. Her hands were shaking as she tried to explain. I wouldn't have come if I had another choice. My bus broke down, and my son is waiting for me at home. I don't know what else to do." Panic rose in my chest. I glanced back at the house. My mother was inside, and if she saw Linda here, questions would be asked. "You need to go," I whispered. "Right now." But before I could shut the door, my mother's voice rang out from behind me. "Maggie? Who is it?" I froze. Linda took a small step back, as if she wished she could disappear. Just someone who got lost," I stammered, trying to block Linda from view. But it was too late. My mother stepped forward, her sharp eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "Who is this?" Linda hesitated, looking at me for permission, but there was nothing I could do. She swallowed and finally said, I'm the house cleaner." The air went still. I felt my stomach drop. My mother turned to me slowly, disbelief clear in her eyes. What did she just say? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. "Maggie," she continued, her voice eerily calm, "you told me you were cleaning the house yourself every week." I shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I mean, technically, the house is getting cleaned. And you've been taking $500 from me each time?" I swallowed hard. "How much have you been paying her?" my mother asked. Linda hesitated before murmuring, $50. The silence was unbearable. My mother inhaled deeply, her jaw tightening. "So let me get this straight. You've been taking advantage of this woman, paying her next to nothing, while lying to me and pocketing the rest." I wanted to defend myself, but the words stuck in my throat. She took another deep breath before speaking. "If you think cleaning is such an easy job, then you can do it yourself. And not here, at Linda's." My stomach twisted. "Mom, no!" "Yes," she said firmly. "If you refuse, you're not getting your birthday car. Period." I gaped at her. "You wouldn't." Her expression was stone cold. "Try me." I wanted to argue, to tell her how ridiculous this was, but one look at her face told me there was no changing her mind. Linda shifted awkwardly. "Mrs. Evelyn, this really isn't necessary." "No, I insist," my mother interrupted. "Maggie needs to learn what hard work feels like." I clenched my fists, and just like that, my nightmare began. The next morning, I found myself standing outside Linda's tiny apartment, dreading every second of what was to come. She opened the door, looking just as uncomfortable as I felt. "You really don't have to do this," she said softly. "Yeah, well, apparently I do," I muttered, stepping inside. The moment I entered, I realized just how small the place was compared to my house. It felt cramped, like every piece of furniture was pressed too close together. "You can start with the living room," Linda said, "then the kitchen and bathroom. My son is in the bedroom, so you won't have to go in there." I nodded stiffly. "Fine." At first, I thought it wouldn't be too bad. I grabbed a rag and started wiping down the coffee table. easy enough. But then I looked around and realized just how much work needed to be done. Dust clung to every surface. Dishes were piled in the sink. The floor was covered in small stains that I had no idea how to clean. I swallowed hard. By the time I finished with the living room, my arms ached and sweat dripped down my back. Linda walked in, glancing around. "You're doing good," she said kindly. I scowled. "Yeah, whatever." She sighed but didn't argue. "You can take a break if you need to." I shook my head. "Number? Let's just get this over with." Hours later, when I finally finished, I collapsed onto the couch, completely drained. "I can't believe you do this every day," I admitted, breathing heavily. Linda gave me a tired smile. "When you don't have a choice, you just do it." For the first time, I actually looked at her, really looked at her. She was exhausted, worn down, but there was something in her eyes, determination, resilience, and suddenly I felt ashamed. "I'm sorry," I blurted out, "for how I treated you before." She blinked, surprised. Then she smiled. "Thank you." That night, when I got home, I collapsed onto my couch. My mother was waiting for me. "So," she said, "how was it?" I hesitated before answering. "Hard, exhausting. I don't know how she does it." My mother nodded. "Good. Maybe now you understand." And I did. The next few weeks passed, and I continued working at Linda's apartment. But something shifted. I stopped dreading it. I started noticing things. How little she had. How much she sacrificed for her son. And it made me realize how incredibly selfish I had been. Then, one day, as I was about to leave, I handed her a set of keys. "What's this?" she asked. "My car," I said. "It's yours!" Her eyes widened. "What? No, Maggie, I can't." "Yes, you can," I insisted. "You need it more than I do." Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me." My mother was standing nearby, watching with a proud smile. "Maggie, I'm really proud of you." And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had actually done something that mattered. I stepped out of Linda's apartment, my legs feeling like they were sinking into wet cement. Every inch of my body ached. My hands were raw from scrubbing floors, and sweat clung to the back of my neck. I had never felt so physically exhausted in my life. But worse than the exhaustion was the growing knot of shame in my chest. For 16 years, I had lived in complete comfort, never once stopping to think about the people who worked behind the scenes to make my life easier. People like Linda. I had told myself that cleaning was easy, something that anyone could do. But today had proved me wrong. When I got home, my mother was waiting for me in the living room, arms crossed. "So?" she asked, her tone unreadable. I hesitated, searching for a way to justify myself. But in the end, I only managed to shake my head. "It was hard," I admitted. "I don't know how she does it every day." Mom nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "Good. You needed to know that." I didn't respond. I just dragged myself upstairs and collapsed onto my bed. But no matter how tired I was, my mind wouldn't stop racing. Images of Linda's tiny apartment, the old stained countertops, the sweat dripping down her face as she worked. Everything played over and over in my head. I tossed and turned all night, unable to shake the thought that if I felt this drained after a single day, how did she manage to do this every day? When morning came, I woke up with a thought lingering at the back of my mind. I needed to know more about Linda. When I returned to her apartment the next day, something had changed. She looked surprised to see me standing at her door right on time. "I thought you'd quit after yesterday." I shrugged. "My mom isn't giving me a choice." Linda just smiled, as if she saw right through me. But she didn't say anything. Instead, she handed me a broom. This time, as I cleaned, I paid more attention. I noticed the little things, the old photographs on the walls, most of them showing a bright-eyed little boy with a wide grin. I noticed the small stack of well-loved toys sitting neatly on a shelf. As I scrubbed the floors, I heard a door creak open. I glanced up and saw a small boy standing in the doorway of the bedroom, his frame thin, his skin pale. Before I could say anything, Linda quickly stepped in and gently ushered him back inside, shutting the door behind her. When she turned back to me, her expression was softer. "That's my son, Noah." I hesitated. He looks sick." She nodded, her smile fading slightly. "He has leukemia. It's been tough since his father left. The medical bills." She trailed off and sighed. "But I'll do whatever it takes to give him a fighting chance." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't know what to say. I had never met someone who had to deal with something so overwhelming. "I'm sorry," I said, though it felt like such a useless thing to say. Linda gave me a small, tired smile. "Don't be. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad." I nodded, but something in my chest felt tight. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Noah, about how he was lying in that tiny bedroom while I was sprawled across my massive, comfortable bed. For the first time in my life, I felt small. Over the next few days, something changed in me. I stopped dragging my feet when I went to Linda's apartment. I stopped grumbling under my breath and started paying attention. One afternoon, while scrubbing the sink, I heard soft giggles coming from Noah's room. "Miss Maggie!" I looked up, surprised to see Noah sitting up in bed, waving me over. I hesitated before stepping inside. Up close, he was even smaller than I'd thought, but his eyes were bright, full of curiosity. "I'm Noah," he said proudly, as if announcing himself to a grand audience. I smiled. "Nice to meet you, Noah. Are you working with my mom?" I nodded. He tilted his head. "So, are you poor like us?" I let out a small laugh, but quickly realized he was completely serious. "Not exactly," I said carefully. "Your mom hired me to help clean." His face scrunched up in confusion. "But why?" A simple question, but I didn't have a simple answer. I couldn't tell him the truth, that I was forced into this as punishment. I also couldn't say I was doing it out of kindness, because that wasn't true either. So instead I said, "I think I had something to learn." Noah nodded as if that made perfect sense to him. Then his face lit up. "Do you like Disneyland?" I smiled. "Who doesn't?" His excitement grew. "I want to go there so bad. But Mom says we have to save up, so maybe someday." Something in my chest ached. I knew Disneyland tickets were expensive, but for me, it had never been something out of reach. "You'll get there," I promised, even though I wasn't sure if it was true. He grinned. "I hope so." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about Noah, about all the things I had taken for granted in my life, about how I had never once stopped to appreciate the fact that my world had been handed to me on a silver platter. For the first time, I wanted to do something to change that. The next morning, I arrived at Linda's apartment earlier than usual. For the first time, I wasn't dragging my feet or dreading the work ahead. Something had shifted inside me. I wasn't just there because my mom had forced me to be. I was there because I wanted to be. Linda raised an eyebrow when she opened the door. "You're early," I shrugged. "Figured I'd get a head start." She studied me for a moment before smiling. "Well, I won't say no to the help." As I grabbed the mop and started working, my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about Noah, his tiny frame, the way his eyes sparkled when he talked about Disneyland, the hope in his voice when he said, "Maybe someday." But someday wasn't good enough. As I scrubbed the kitchen counters, I finally blurted out, "Linda, how much have you saved for the trip?" She hesitated before answering. "Not enough." I glanced at her. "How much do you still need?" She sighed, wiping her hands on a towel. "More than I can make in a few months, and that's if I don't have any unexpected medical bills." Something tightened in my chest. I knew that kind of money meant nothing to my family. My mom could easily spend it on a designer handbag without blinking, but for Linda, it was the difference between making her son's dream come true or watching him miss out on something he might never have the chance to experience again. I couldn't stop thinking about it the entire time I cleaned. Later that evening, when I got home, my mother was sitting in the kitchen, sipping tea and scrolling through her tablet. "Hey, Mom," I said casually, leaning against the counter. She barely glanced up. "Hmm?" I took a deep breath. "I want to give Noah my birthday money." She looked up then, her brows furrowing. "Excuse me?" I swallowed. "The money you were going to give me for my birthday. I want to use it to send Noah to Disneyland." She set down her tablet, studying me carefully. "Are you sure about that?" I nodded. "Completely." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. "Well, I wasn't expecting that." I shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, well, I wasn't expecting to care this much." She let out a small chuckle. "I'm proud of you, Maggie. And if that's really what you want, then I'll make sure he gets there." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Thank you." The next day, I showed up at Linda's with an envelope in my hand. She opened the door, frowning at the sight of me. "What's that?" I took a deep breath and held it out to her. "Enough for you and Noah to go to Disneyland." Her eyes widened. "What?" "You heard me," I said, my voice soft. "It's yours." She just stood there, staring at me as if I had grown a second head. Finally, she shook her head. "Maggie, I can't take this." "Yes, you can," I insisted. "Please." Her hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. When she opened it and saw the amount inside, tears welled up in her eyes. "This is too much." I shook my head. "It's not enough, honestly. Noah deserves this." "You deserve this." For the first time since I'd met her, Linda looked truly speechless. Then, before I could react, she pulled me into a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to us." I hugged her back, my own eyes burning with unshed tears. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had done something that actually mattered. A week later, Linda sent me a photo of Noah standing in front of Cinderella's castle, grinning from ear to ear, a pair of Mickey Mouse ears perched on his head. Beneath the photo, her message read, "You made this happen." I stared at the picture for a long time, a warm feeling spreading through my chest. Maybe I had started this whole journey as a selfish, spoiled girl who only cared about herself. But now I knew better. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it truly meant to give. A few days after Noah and Linda returned from Disneyland, I found myself standing outside their apartment again. This time, I wasn't there because I had to be. I was there because I wanted to be. When Linda opened the door, she looked surprised to see me. "Maggie, what are you doing here?" I shifted awkwardly, shoving my hands into my pockets. "I just wanted to check in, see how everything went." Her face softened. "Come in." As I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the energy in the apartment. It felt lighter. Noah was sitting on the couch, flipping through a photo album filled with Disneyland pictures. When he saw me, his whole face lit up. "Miss Maggie!" he called excitedly, waving me over. I walked over and sat beside him. "Hey, buddy, how was the trip?" His eyes sparkled. "It was awesome! We went on so many rides. I met Mickey Mouse, and guess what? I even got a churro." I couldn't help but laugh. "A churro? Huh? Was it good?" He nodded enthusiastically. "The best." Linda watched us from the kitchen, smiling softly. I turned to her. "How was it for you?" She let out a small chuckle. "Exhausting, but worth every second." Noah flipped to another page in the album, showing me a picture of him on Space Mountain. His arms were raised in the air, his face a mix of excitement and pure joy. Something inside me warmed. I had done this. I had given him this moment. And for the first time, I understood what my mom had been trying to teach me all along. I wasn't just some spoiled girl who had never worked a day in her life. I was capable of more than that. Over the next few weeks, I started visiting more often. At first, I told myself it was just to help around the house. But soon, it became more than that. I found myself sitting with Noah, listening to him talk about his favorite superheroes. I found myself chatting with Linda over cups of tea, learning more about her struggles and her dreams. I found myself caring. One evening, as I was sweeping the floor, Linda leaned against the counter and studied me with an amused expression. "You know," she said, "you don't have to come here anymore." I glanced up. "I know." She raised an eyebrow. "So why do you?" I hesitated before answering. "Because I want to." Her lips curved into a smile. "Well, I never thought I'd see the day." I smirked. "Yeah, well, neither did I." One afternoon, when I arrived at the apartment, I noticed something different. The usual hum of energy was missing. Noah wasn't in the living room. The place was eerily quiet. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. "Linda?" She stepped out of the bedroom, looking exhausted. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red. "Hey," she said softly. Immediately, I knew something was wrong. "What happened?" She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Noah's not doing well." I felt my heart drop. "Is he?" "He's resting," she said quickly. "But his fever spiked last night. We had to go to the hospital. The doctors are monitoring him closely." I swallowed hard. "Linda, is there anything I can do?" She shook her head, offering me a tired smile. "Just be here. That's enough." So I stayed. Over the next few days, I watched as Linda struggled to keep everything together. She was running on fumes, trying to balance work and Noah's care. One evening, after she finally got Noah to sleep, I sat with her at the kitchen table. "You need a break," I told her. She let out a breathless laugh. "A break?" "Maggie, I can't afford a break." I hesitated before speaking. "You don't have to do this alone." She met my gaze, something unreadable in her expression. "Maggie, I appreciate everything you've done, but—" "I'm serious," I interrupted. "My mom has connections. Maybe she can help get you a job that lets you work from home. Something with health benefits. Something stable." She blinked, clearly taken aback. "You'd do that for me?" I nodded. "Of course." For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then, to my surprise, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. A few days later, my mom pulled some strings and got Linda an interview at her company. The position allowed her to work remotely, which meant she could stay home with Noah while still earning a stable income. When she got the job, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "This changes everything," she whispered. I smiled. Good. One evening, a few weeks later, I sat on the couch beside Noah, watching a superhero movie. His head rested against my arm, his breathing slow and steady. "Miss Maggie," he murmured sleepily. "Yeah?" He smiled, his eyes half closed. "You're my hero." My chest tightened. I ran a hand through his soft curls and whispered, "Noah, you're the real hero." He let out a content sigh, and moments later, he was asleep. Linda watched from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. I met her gaze and smiled back. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly found my purpose. And it had nothing to do with money or privilege. It had everything to do with love. That night, as I walked home, I thought about how much had changed since the day Linda had shown up at my front door, desperate and drenched from the rain. Back then, I had been selfish, spoiled, blind to the struggles of people who weren't as lucky as me. But now I understood. I wasn't just Maggie, the rich girl who had never worked a day in her life. I was Maggie, the girl who had learned what it meant to care. And for that, I would always be grateful. As time passed, things started falling into place. Linda had settled into her new job, one that allowed her to work from home while taking care of Noah. The stability gave her the relief she had long needed, and I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders bit by bit. Noah, despite his ongoing battle with illness, remained his bright and hopeful self. Every time I visited, he would greet me with a smile, as if his body wasn't waging war against him. But not everything in life ties itself up in a perfect bow. One evening, while I was helping Linda prepare dinner, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw my mom's name. I picked up. "Hey, Mom!" Her voice was sharp, annoyed. "Where are you?" I hesitated. "At Linda's." A sigh came through the phone. "Again?" "Yes, again," I said, feeling my patience thin. "Maggie," she said in a lower voice, the kind she used when she was trying to keep her anger in check. "You are spending an awful lot of time there. I didn't raise you to waste your energy on people who—" She stopped herself, but I knew exactly what she was about to say. "On people like her?" I finished for her, bitterness in my tone. There was silence on the other end. Linda, who had been quietly stirring a pot of soup, looked at me with concern. "Maggie," my mother finally said, softer now, "you've changed." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, I have." Another pause. "And you think that's a good thing?" I closed my eyes. "Yes, Mom, I really do." She exhaled loudly, clearly frustrated. "Well, don't come crying to me when you realize this was all a mistake." Then she hung up. I stared at my phone for a moment before setting it down. "Everything okay?" Linda asked gently. I nodded, but I wasn't sure if I was telling the truth. Weeks passed, and things at home became strained. My mother hated the fact that I spent less time at home, hated the fact that I chose to be at Linda's tiny apartment rather than in our luxurious house. I knew she didn't understand, or maybe she refused to understand. Then, one evening, she confronted me outright. "Maggie," she said, standing in the doorway of my room, arms crossed. "Enough of this nonsense. It's time for you to come back to your real life." I looked up from my desk. "My real life?" She sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Yes, this ridiculous charity project you've taken on." I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "Charity project?" She blinked, surprised at my sudden outburst. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "You still don't get it, do you?" She frowned. "Get what?" "That this isn't some phase I'm going through," I said, voice rising. "That this isn't me acting out or rebelling. This is me finally seeing the world for what it is. And you know what, Mom? I like who I am now. Her lips pressed into a thin line. So? You're just going to throw everything away for them? I'm not throwing anything away, I shot back. I'm finally doing something that matters. She scoffed. So what? You're going to be poor now? Live paycheck to paycheck like Linda? I felt something snap inside me. I'd rather be broke and happy than be rich and miserable like you. The second the words left my mouth, I knew they had hit her harder than she would ever admit. Her face twisted in anger, but beneath it, I saw something else. Hurt. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in my life, she had no response. I grabbed my bag and brushed past her. "Where are you going?" she demanded. I didn't stop walking. Somewhere I actually matter. It was late when I arrived at Linda's, but she opened the door before I could even knock. She took one look at my face and stepped aside. "Come in." I didn't say anything. I just walked in and sat down on the couch. Noah, curled up under a blanket, looked up at me sleepily. "Miss Maggie?" I forced a smile. "Hey, buddy." He yawned, rubbing his eyes. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly. "Yeah, Noah, I will be." He nodded sleepily, then curled back into his blanket. Linda sat beside me, watching me carefully. "You stood up to her, didn't you?" I nodded. She sighed. "Maggie, she's your mother." I let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah, she is." For a long moment, we just sat there in silence. Then Linda said, "You're always welcome here, you know." I looked at her, at this woman who had once been nothing more than an afterthought to me. And now, she was family. I don't know if my mother will ever understand. I don't know if she'll ever see things the way I do now. But maybe that's okay. Because I've found where I belong, and for the first time in my life, I know who I am. Some people say that money is everything, that without it, you're nothing. But the truth? Money can't buy kindness, it can't buy love, and it sure as hell can't buy purpose. So tell me, if you had to choose between wealth and true happiness, which would you pick? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you ever find yourself in a position to help someone, even in the smallest way, do it. You never know how much it might change a life, maybe even your own.